Thank you, Alvaro. Good morning, bonjour. I think it's going to be difficult for me not to repeat some of the things I said yesterday, but I'll try. I'll do my best, see if I can respond. And I'm going to deal with the issue that I was asked to deal with, which is the challenges that we face. Because we do face a challenge right now regarding sustainability and landscapes. So there's a number of challenges. On the one hand, the more pressing needs. We've seen that things are very complicated. It's the food crisis, it's the energy crisis, it's the financial crisis. In 2010, we had a bit of a slow period, and now we've seen again how foodstuffs are skyrocketing in terms of prices. June, July, which is when we begin to see the wheat or cereal harvests in the northern hemisphere, we begin to see a slight loosening up. We're not sure. Actually, there's 3-4 months. This is a very important factor. And there's structural elements also that need to be taken into account, which certainly reinforce our concerns. So this is going to be something that we will have to take into account and that we will be having to deal with. And then there's a second issue, which is very important also. It's the energy crisis. Food and energy go hand in hand, of course, and the issues which in the long term, and the events which in the long term can be very favorable, but which concern us, the situation in Northern Africa and the Middle East, and of course the nuclear crisis which has followed the earthquake and the tsunami. And then there's the financial crisis. The financial crisis, which is where we kicked off, and hand in hand with this, there's safety and security issues. But what I think is more important is to stress those underlying elements which we don't perhaps really focus on because they don't make the headlines. Climate change, for instance. There are strong defenders such as Al Gore, a spokesman who has made it possible for everyone to focus on the fact in the past 2 years, and then demographic change in developing countries. China has been able to control its growth, but not all other countries have, which allows us to say that from 9 billion by the year 2050, that's our expectation. We hope thenceforth to achieve stability. And then also the shift of growth, so emerging countries, South America and especially Southeast Asia, are really taking off. And then land development in all continents, with the exception of Africa. Africa lags behind a little bit, but doubtless we will see urbanization in Africa also. And then a globalized and interconnected world in terms of services provided as well as in terms of products and production. So the consequences of all of the above are, of course, a growing demand of raw material and renewable energies, and this, of course, targets agriculture and forests, because non-renewables either carbon issuers or as nuclear, well, we see that there are limits to everything. And these, obviously, in terms of renewables and provided by farming and forest management, and with regards to energies, only those that are physically renewables, solar, geothermal, hydraulic, marine, those would complement biomass alternatives. But if we think in global terms now, over half of renewables are biomass based, so they are very closely linked with forest management and farming. And this leads us to understand that land-based resources become strategic. So just think for a second about Africa and how China has made its presence felt. Yes, China helps develop, but yes, China also buys or rents land in order to guarantee what it needs in the future, which does not mean that the increasing demands that we've seen recently, especially in the developed world, not be maintained or even furthered, because we see the middle class growing. So we have carbon issues, we have biodiversity, water, land, and territorial issues. So we're not only taking into account the productive nature of the forest, we're actually seeing an overlapping of quality issues at stake. And what can we rely on? Well, in some parts of the world, they're very sparsely populated, but in other parts of the world which are more heavily populated, resources that we have access to respond to uses and needs that are very different from the original ones. And they see that, or rather we see, that they are disappearing because the driving forces are disappearing, or have disappeared even. And these territories that are being lost or just being recovered are going to respond with great difficulty to these new demands. So we're talking about renewals, very unstable ones. If we think about the Iberian Peninsula, well, we think about Pinus salipensis, Pinus sylvestris in mountainous areas, or the recoveries of shrubland. That's the kind of ecosystem we're talking about. And these territories have to adapt to climate change in some parts of the world. In North America, we begin to see critical alarms being triggered. And in Europe, because the climate is more Atlantic, it's not as general, but probably we will be seeing this rearing its ugly head. Obviously, this recovery and optimization of uses must take into account the ecosystemical restrictions. The criteria are going to have to be social and economic. So we're going to be seeing a concentration of farming activities on the best soils. We're going to be seeing that recovery. We're going to be seeing a recovery of forests on those crops, the driving force in many countries, in ours for thousands of years, and in tropical systems we see that even now. And then those parts of the world that have no farm value because of gradients and so on. And then in agroforestry systems, tropics, semi-arid climate, which allow for a combination of uses and which allow for avoiding the extreme dichotomy between one and another use. We're going to be seeing, therefore, soil being protected and a sufficient stockage of carbon and biodiversity. And then where there's risk of fire, we're going to have to make sure that this recovery does not imply major vertical or horizontal discontinuities, which then will result in the loss of monies invested. So here we see a quasi-optimum landscape. You see forest masses on the mountains, you see the farms, and the population lives where there are fewer risks. These are challenges, and these challenges are basically territory scale, fire, insect, and often enough to a greater degree. And this also encourages us to create territories that be more resilient. So we see a recovery in order to generate structures which are more fire resistant because they can recover or because they can resist without losing these structures. They're more resilient, more densities, and therefore performing better in the face of fire. These future landscapes and territories must try and optimize the total output in environmental, social, and economic terms alike, perhaps more especially in social and environmental terms. Obviously, part of this recovery, in order to cut costs, because nobody has a deep pocket at this point, the aim also, as I say, is to think about driving natural processes, which at some points in time can be very useful. As I said yesterday, and as Ms. McAlpine mentioned, the global partnership has estimated between 1.5 billion hectares the amount of land which can be restored, and this without affecting food safety. We're looking at agroforestry, we're looking at recovery of parts of land that have already been abandoned in semi-arid areas where there is no conflict. So this actually would improve the carbon balance, because we're talking about 25% more mass. We're going to be seeing a protection of the ground itself and the hydro cycle, biodiversity, territory, and production. And I would remind you that we need to ensure that forests grow into the flatlands. This is where they're less useful in hydro terms, so we need to ensure that we guide the process and we maintain farming activities in those flatlands where the hydro event and effect is going to be lesser. So if we look at the numbers, see what happened in 2050, we could try and recover that carbon balance to what we had in place before the industrial era.
In the first part of the century, half of the surface identified as partnership, if we carry out reforestation of 20,000 hectares, which is like it's 5 million of hectares are reforested. If we do that during these 50 years and we reduce the carbon emissions an average of 60% in the year 2050, and after carrying on with the carbon sequestration in the seas as it's now, at present, we could get to the pre-industrialization carbon level. So in order to recover this situation, we need to reduce significantly the carbon emissions, and also we have to use all the opportunities of reforestation and recovery of the forest spaces we have today. This recovery has to be based on the upgrading of the role of these semi-natural systems, and most of it where they are considered as degraded ecosystems, and when they should be considered as the main pillar of this action. Because the forests are covering more than 60% of the surface of the planet, and it is the accessible lands and the natural areas are located on these inaccessible, sometimes inaccessible places. So we have to go over these spaces, and we have to approach them, and it is the case of Japan, for example. All these areas, these Asian areas, and this work in these areas should be based upon these recognitions of these semi-natural areas, because they are areas that have been populated since centuries, and the segregated actions cannot be applied in this case. So we have to care about the indigenous species and varieties, introducing new ones in specific cases. If we do not manage these landscapes, the fire will be doing it. So the answer to these demands management, sustainable management, and also we've got many examples of restoration, of recovery. For example, here we've got the Mont Altus in France, as it was 1 century ago. So there was those typical areas, deserted areas with very few trees, as we can find in the area of the Alps and the southern Europe. And thanks to restoration and recovery, we have the Mont Ventoux, which has been fully recovered. These examples show the know-how and the experience we have. Of course, we have had mistakes as regards the genetic species and varieties, but this forest has been recovered fully. So we are in a crossroads of two paths, and as we talked about the Rio +20 summits. The forest is not at the center, but it is a major element, and thanks to the new technologies and to the fashion of the set aside, the forests, lands could be neglected, or on the other side, they could be identified as the main assets, and if they are most of all managed in a sustainable way. So we are at a crossroads where we can just choose one of those two alternatives. This is one of those challenges we are facing. We have to get all the capacity to enhance the production capacity of those products, coordinated with the agriculture, and in order to bring about all their side products in order to enhance them. And if we want to also improve the quality of these products, byproducts and this is going to be able with the commitment of all the sectors. Of course, we've got this green economy, biorefineries, where Canada is very much present, and northern countries, also some European countries. It is where we are heading, the research, the bio-based knowledge society, a knowledge society based on new products that are coming from the agriculture, the forest, but also from the agriculture sector. This, we're facing a major challenge, and we want to reduce the carbon emission by means of substitutions and storing of these products. This means a huge challenge in the Rio +20 summit, agriculture plus forests, heading towards a green economy. But we cannot be only talking about hardware, we have to talk about software, the adequate software, one of those instruments, the political structure that we cannot see, but it is lying behind. If we see Rome, for example, with the Roman Empire, it is based on the rights and the law and the Roman rights. These structures are essential. We do not always see the structures. We see many layers up on the social layer that leads us to these kind of important structures and schemes. So the software is essential, and the financing is essential. We have two main axes. First of all, the recovery investment, which is costly, because on top of the resources we need an important logistic where China is going to recover 3 million hectares each year. Spain only recovered 3,000 hectares each year in best days. So this demands an important logistic capacity to have personal and people working, thousands of millions of dollars on the table, but also a good coordination, of course. So we mustn't forget the money. Also, in the case of multifunctional forests, the forests capitalized that without this financing we won't achieve all these projects. We need permanent flows until these forests are fully recovered, and also because we mustn't forget the low productivity and high multifunctionality, they require an important work and important action. So we have to have some base subsidies that should be combined together with the investments. So it should be a temporal mix where the countries who already have those finances, like Bhutan won't require any money, but Pakistan will require a lot more. So together with this, we should talk about the social participation, but also the conception and design of transition, the social transition of these landscapes, and also to fully commit all the local population, knowing, first of all, if this agriculture can disappear, having a transition towards a most modern sector, having a structure that should be in line with the needs and the landscape. When, for example, we have energetic forest, but it is going to take time, because if we have to take profit of the first logging, it's going to take time. So we have to involve local population through work. For example, we have already mentioned it before, the payment of environmental services. It can't be passive. It has also to imply an activity. It has to be linked to an activity to generate employment, in order to have several actions and employments created around that. I'm sure it has to be closely linked to training, but not only at the university level, but also at the intermediate levels, and also the participation of the SMEs, looking for the competition, decentralization, the efficiency, creating employment, the public investments, and the incomes, that is something that these structures are not yet present in our countries, and we need them to, in order for the investment to be continuous and permanent, and also if we want to head to efficiency. And also, last but not least, the elements that are linked to management, a fourth of the forest that have been managed and are being managed by the local population as instruments to guarantee this forestry development through coordination, and also it's the only way to link and to involve population and social participation. Vietnam, China are following this path. Also, we have to redefine the role played by public agencies. They have to be less sectorial, they have to lead processes, they have to create new frameworks and also act upon intersectorial aspects. As I've said before, and as has been said by Jane McAlpin, the importance of the forestry communication, it is key in the urban societies, and also we mustn't forget that the mistake in the diagnostic is also a mistake in the treatment. And if we carry out a survey in our countries, I'm sure that the great majority of the population would say that the forests are less important in those deep emerging countries, although it is the contrary. So if we have, we could just be mistaken by the treatments, as we can be mistaken in medicine, for example. We have to have a good reputation, a good evaluation before taking actions. Although otherwise it could be traumatic, for example, in the Mediterranean area where the fires are a major problem. We also can can look at the figures, the investment, because we are investing a lot of public funds at all levels, from the municipalities to the regions and countries, and these forests are places for the creation of population, and it is very important for population. Also, I would like to stress another issue, which is the forest origin of the term sustainability. So we have had differences based upon a bad translation, English translation, which was sustained yield, and it was a report written by Rutland. So we have changed, we have preserved this translation, and this English translation of sustained yield was only based upon production. Although the report, the Brundtland report, which is where important environmentalists like Karl Pulbert and Institute always talk about the forest origin, and the widening this concept is based upon the respect of important resources and do not commit the future generation and compromise the future generation. So this forest origin is of utmost importance for the culture of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention. And